This cake tastes baked. This was sent in by a viewer. Happy birthday, Ra. Also, please subscribe to the podcast, everyone. Thank you. The link is below. Bye. This case takes place in the USA in the 1980s. A white refrigerator lay abandoned at the edge of a rural track in Knox County, Kentucky. The door bore a red and blue sticker that read Superwoman. The door to this unassuming refrigerator was opened, and what was inside horrified locals for years. A young woman with long auburn hair was folded into the metal shell, her body discarded. This is the case of the Redhead Murders. Lisa Nichols was a 26-year-old woman who struggled with unstable relationships and went through a period of drifting across southern states, often relying on lifts from lorry drivers to move between towns. Friends later described her as restless and always searching for a fresh start. Unfortunately, she never got that fresh start. She had red hair, pale skin, and was last seen alive near a truck shop outside West Memphis, Arkansas. On the 16th of September 1984, a motorist spotted a body in a drainage ditch alongside Interstate 40 in Crittenden County. The police arrived to find Lisa lying face up in shallow water with her sweater clinging to her body. Her body was bloated from decomposition. Ligature marks cut into her neck and her tongue was swollen. There were clear signs of strangulation. There were no defense wounds recorded and no weapon was left at the scene. Detectives searched the roadside for any belongings that could help identify her, but nothing was found. They searched the truck stop where she had last been seen, speaking with clerks and other drivers. Witnesses remembered seeing a red-haired woman who asked for a lift towards the highway, but no one could remember which vehicle she entered. Fingerprints were taken from the body and they were stored, but the match didn't come until June of 1985. For 9 months, Lisa was a Jane Doe, but after this, Lisa's identity was finally confirmed and her family was told of her fate. The early theory was that she had accepted a ride from a long-distance lorry driver and was killed shortly after leaving the stop. The lack of drag marks suggested that she was killed elsewhere in the truck and then carried directly from the cab to the ditch. The police ran out of new information and, without a single suspect, the case went cold. However, this wasn't the only victim. Tina Marie McKenney Farmer, aged 21, vanished in late 1984 after leaving Indiana with her boyfriend. Like the previous victim, she too was a redhead. On the 1st of January 1985, a driver traveling north on Interstate 75 near Jellicoe, Campbell County, Tennessee, noticed what looked like a bundle at the bottom of the embankment. He called the police to report something suspicious. When the police arrived, they found a young woman wrapped tightly in a blanket, face down in the mud. Her wrists were bound, and deep groove marks marked the skin around her neck. An autopsy confirmed that strangulation was the cause of death, but they also found that she was pregnant. It was clear to the investigators that she had been killed several days before discovery. The medical examiner collected semen and hair samples and preserved them for future testing. The blanket was logged and bagged, hoping that one day this evidence could catch the killer. At the time, the police had no idea who Tina was. They searched nearby motels and service stations, checking registers for her name, but no match came back. For decades, she was recorded only as a Jane Doe. Her remains laid in an anonymous grave whilst evidence sat sealed in storage, and again, the case went cold. It wouldn't be until 2018, using advanced DNA testing, that her true identity was confirmed, and she was finally given her name back. However, in between that time, the phenomenon of the redhead killings continued. Lori Ann Mila Pennell was a 22-year-old woman with ginger hair, and she was living near West Memphis in early 1985. On the 24th of January that year, a truck driver pulled up on the shoulder of US Highway 78 east of the Coldwater River Bridge near Olive Branch, Mississippi. He saw the body of a young woman lying close to the tarmac and called the police. Officers found her half undressed, with ripped clothing. She had bruising around her throat and again signs of strangulation. Her body was still warm when she was discovered, suggesting that she had only just been killed. Tire impressions on the clay floor indicated a vehicle had stopped and pulled away quickly. This led investigators to believe that the killer had pushed her from the passenger side of the vehicle in the darkness and left her at the edge of the highway to be discovered. But tragically, there were no witnesses, and once again, the case went cold. Michelle Lavone Inman was a 23-year-old woman who lived in Nashville in the mid-80s. She went missing towards the end of 1984, and her family never heard from her again. On the 31st of March 1985, a motorist pulled off Interstate 24 between mile markers 29 and 30 in Cheatham County, Tennessee. He walked towards a stream and noticed bones scattered near the bank. Police recovered a partial skeleton with strands of reddish hair still clinging to the skull. Once again, the police had no idea who these bones belonged to. Once again, she was only known as a Jane Doe. It wouldn't be until DNA searches became more advanced that her family were informed. Ebsie Pilgrim was a 28-year-old woman who drifted between towns in North Carolina during the spring of 1985. Just the day after Michelle was discovered, a refrigerator was found dumped off US Highway 25E near Gray, Kentucky. A local man noticed this, so he pulled over and opened the door. Inside the refrigerator, he found the naked body of a woman with long ginger hair. Her frame was contorted to fit inside the box. Her lips were blue and her eyes were open. A pair of men's boots were also found nearby, and these were collected as evidence. The police also traced the refrigerator to a delivery route, but they could not connect it to a suspect. The police also tried to find the identity of the woman, but they were unsuccessful for many years. She was referred to only as the Knox County Refrigerator Jane Doe. It wouldn't be until 2018 that DNA matched her to her daughter and a positive identification was made. And this just continued. Tracy Sue Walker was just 15 when she vanished. Her bones were recovered in Tennessee in 1985. Elizabeth Lammett was just 17 when she disappeared from a youth facility in New Hampshire in 1984. She was found murdered that same year in Tennessee. Stacy Chorosky was just 19 when she was seen hitchhiking in 1988. Her strangled body was found in Georgia. All three had red hair, and all died in similar circumstances. Other bodies were found too, women with red hair scattered along highways in West Virginia, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Some remained unidentified. Their stories likely will never be known. So, between 1983 and 1985, the bodies of multiple young women with red hair were discovered abandoned near highways across Tennessee, Kentucky, and neighboring states. Local police in each jurisdiction initially handled these cases separately. It was only after several months, as more victims appeared in Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Kentucky, and West Virginia, that investigators began to see a possible connection. The victims all shared notable similarities. Many had reddish hair, were found dumped along major interstates, and had been strangled or suffocated. Most were discovered without clothing or any identification, frustrating efforts to name them or notify their next of kin. The press soon latched onto the striking hair colour pattern and dubbed the case the Redhead Murders, a label that stuck in media reports. Concerned by the possibility of a roaming serial killer, law enforcement agencies from 5 states convened a special multi-state task force in late April of 1985. Investigators from Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Kentucky, West Virginia, and the FBI met in Nashville for a 6-hour summit. Their goal was to pull information, determine which cases might be connected, and strategize how to stop the killer or killers. FBI behavioral experts were brought in to analyze the pattern. They reviewed each case side by side, noting the common threads. Because most of the victims had died by strangulation or suffocation, this indicated that the killer enjoyed the hands-on method of killing. He enjoyed watching them die, and enjoyed watching them die in fear. Investigators also mapped the dump sites on a regional map and overlaid them with trucking routes and interstate corridors. The pattern centered along key transport arteries: Interstates 40, 24, 75, 81, and 59, all of which form the backbone of cross-state travel in that region. These roads carry heavy freight traffic day and night, which fits the theory that the offender could be a long-haul truck driver using the highways to find victims and dispose of the bodies with an easy escape route. To cast a wider net, the task force decided to share information publicly. They opened telephone tip lines and distributed bulletins describing the known victims, yet of course at the time, most of the victims were Jane Does. Flyers were sent to truck stops and rest areas across the South, and descriptions of unidentified women were printed in regional newspapers in hopes that someone, somewhere, would recognize them. But tragically for most of the victims, nobody came forward. The police urged the public to be cautious, suggesting that the killer might indeed be a long-distance truck driver who targeted women travelling alone or those who might be hitchhiking and vulnerable. Despite the cooperation and these efforts, the April 1985 summit ended without a definitive suspect. Investigators faced a daunting reality. They still had no name for the killer, and not even names for most of the victims. However, as the task force met, events were unfolding that provided potential suspects. A new piece of evidence emerged. In March of 1985, a red-haired 24-year-old exotic dancer named Linda in Knox County, Tennessee, survived a brutal attack that seemed to echo the pattern of the Redhead Murders. A customer at the club where Linda worked lured her with a particular promise. He tore a $100 bill in half, gave her one part, and offered her the rest in exchange for a sexual favour. After she agreed to go with him, the man, later identified as Jerry Leon Johns, pulled a gun on her. He ripped up her shirt to bind her, then drove to a wooded area off Interstate 40. There, he strangled Linda until she lost consciousness and left her for dead. Miraculously, Linda survived the strangulation, and after regaining consciousness, she managed to flag down a driver for some help. Her detailed testimony led the police to arrest 37-year-old Jerry Leon Johns within days, charging him with attempted murder, kidnapping, and assault. Now, Jerry was the exact type of suspect investigators feared. A long-haul truck driver based in East Tennessee who regularly drove the interstate corridors between Knoxville and Chattanooga. Linda's case was alarmingly similar to the unsolved Redhead homicide cases. By 1985, Jerry became a prime suspect in these murders. Detectives from multiple states interviewed him at length about the string of killings, hoping for some kind of connection. However, Jerry was described as very cocky under questioning, and he denied involvement in the other cases. He also provided credible alibis for several of these murder dates, and at the time, investigators found no physical evidence tying him to the Jane Doe homicides. Thus, aside from the case of Linda, authorities could not charge Jerry with the other murders in 1985. He was eventually convicted in 1987 for the attack on Linda, found guilty of aggravated kidnapping, assault with intent to murder, and other offences, for which he received a 73-year prison sentence. After his conviction, Jerry faded from the headlines, and the Redhead Murders remained unsolved. Although many in law enforcement still quietly suspected that he knew more about the killings than he admitted. In 1986, another promising lead emerged, and again it involved a trucker and a violent attack on a young woman. A long-haul truck driver from Pennsylvania, called Thomas Lee Elkins, was detained after a 20-year-old red-haired woman reported that she had been kidnapped and essayed in his truck. Thankfully, this woman managed to escape, and Thomas was soon arrested. Given the eerie similarities, Tennessee detectives flew out to question Thomas about the Redhead Murders. He had travelled through many of the same regions where the victims had been found, raising suspicion that he could be the elusive killer. Thomas was charged with kidnapping and essaying the case of the surviving victim. However, after a very thorough investigation, the police determined that Thomas was not linked to the Redhead Murders. Just like Jerry, this lead ultimately went nowhere for the broader case, and by the late 80s, there were no other suspects. With no arrests for the murders and no fresh leads, the investigation went cold. Many of the victims remained unidentified Jane Does, making it even harder to track down their killer. However, after more than 30 years of frustration, the Redhead Murders investigation found new energy from an unlikely source: a high school sociology class. In 2018, students at the Elizabethton High School in Tennessee took on the Redhead Murders as a cold case project. The class spent a semester researching the string of killings, poring over details of each case and compiling information from libraries, police files, and online resources. They created maps of the victim dump sites, studied the timelines, and even consulted with law enforcement. The students ultimately produced an offender profile of the potential killer, which described him as a white male, long-haul truck driver in his 30s or 40s at the time of the murders, operating along the interstates through the region. Notably, the class coined the nickname the Bible Belt Strangler for the unknown perpetrator, referencing the fact that the murders occurred in the US Bible Belt region. In April of 2018, the students held a press conference attended by local law enforcement and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to present their findings and the proposed profile. Family members of some victims, who had just recently been identified, even attended. The daughter of the victim, S.B. Black Pilgrim, thanked the class for not letting her mother's case be forgotten. The attention generated by the students' project reignited public interest in the cold case. More importantly, it encouraged law enforcement agencies to take a fresh look at the evidence using modern techniques. This momentum, combined with advancements in DNA technology and forensic genealogy, led to a series of breakthroughs that would follow in the next few years. Investigators began re-examining old evidence with new technologies, leading to the identification of several Jane Doe victims and even pinpointing suspects through DNA. One of the first major breakthroughs involved the very first victim found in Tennessee, Tina Farmer, who was discovered along Interstate 75 in Campbell County on July 1, 1985. As I mentioned, for decades she was only known as a Jane Doe. Hoping for answers, evidence was resubmitted from the crime scene. This evidence was tested with advanced DNA testing. The state criminal lab detected semen on the blanket. The DNA profile from the semen was run through the FBI's database, and there was a match. Jerry Leon Johns, the truck driver who had attacked Linda in 1985. This was a pivotal moment. It directly tied Jerry to at least one of the unsolved murders. However, Tina's identity was still unknown at this point. But in 2018, a missing persons blog provided a critical clue about Tina. The blog listed a young Indiana woman named Tina as missing. A detective dug up an old fingerprint card for Tina Farmer and compared it to the prints taken from the unidentified body back in 1985. And it was a match. Tina was no longer a Jane Doe. With her identity now known, authorities contacted her family to share the bittersweet news that Tina had been found, albeit 33 years after she vanished. In late 2019, armed with this new evidence, a grand jury reviewed the case. They would have identified Jerry for the crime. However, in 2015, Jerry died in prison. Meanwhile, the push to identify the other long unidentified victims accelerated with the use of forensic genetic genealogy, and the women I mentioned earlier were able to be identified, thankfully. And soon, there were even more breakthroughs. In 2022, it was discovered that the Redhead Murders were not committed by one Bible Belt strangler, as a new killer was identified. In September of 2022, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation announced that genealogy DNA had identified a man named Henry Frederick Wise as the man who killed Stacy Charosky, the 19-year-old woman from Michigan. Henry was 34 years old at the time of Stacy's murder, and crucially, he fit the profile of a long-haul trucker in the area, just like the high school students had hypothesized. Henry was never caught or questioned in the 80s. He wasn't even on the police's radar for these crimes, and frustratingly, he died in an accident in South Carolina in 1999, taking his secrets with him. The implication of Henry was a breakthrough not only for Stacy's family, but for the investigation at large. The Redhead Murders may have been a series of crimes by different hands, rather than the spree of a serial killer. The Redhead Murders left decades of silence, unknown graves, and families without answers. Each identification brought long-delayed vigils and new headstones where only unknown had stood. 2 of the killers are now known, but many more questions remain. Were all of these women preyed upon by the same set of hands? Sadly, we may never know. What lingers is the truth that most of these women never saw justice, and what's so tragic is how most of these women remained Jane Does for decades.